Some very tired mornings to begin with, a feeling of worse digestion, a loss of motivation, wandering attempts to get back dopamine hits through food, and a slight depression. This was life without coffee after years of being a several cup a day drinker, but also a sense of relaxation and a calmer heartbeat. What felt like a more natural energy cycle and more successful naps than I've taken in years. Better hydration through switching to herbal tea and drinking lots of it. And surprisingly, a general preference for life without coffee, despite all the negative consequences, at least while I was without it. This, like all experiments where we go without something that's become a normalized part of our life, yielded a few truly unexpected turns. Things you can read about or listen to other people talk about, but you can only truly understand through your feelings, through your experiences with your senses and your emotions. Coffee is one of the most omnipresent modifiers of our life, so it begs the question, without coffee, without caffeine, what changes? This was the experiment. At least 3 weeks without caffeine. That's the minimum amount of time that's generally considered enough to break the physical effects of a habit and thus give you enough distance to evaluate it. And then bring it back. First, in the form of decaffeinated coffee, so I can see what I think of the taste and the experience. And then in its full caffeinated force, so I can see how all that caffeine is affecting me. You can give something up, but it's often when you bring something back that the most shocking understanding of the habit comes. And that was certainly the case with coffee. But first, everything in the beginning and in the middle. So, this isn't the first time that I've given up coffee and caffeine in my life, but it's the first time that I've decided to be so cognizant of the results. And maybe most importantly for this experiment, my life is pretty special right now. I don't go to an office or sit through meetings or have any sort of to do list that has to get done. I don't have any sort of strict schedule whatsoever. If you think that sounds great, realize I also make no money. But what this allows for is a more impressionable canvas. The last time I gave up coffee, I was busy from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to bed. I had a busy and somewhat stressful job. I spent nights and weekends meeting friends, doing activities, trying to keep up with my own interests. I was on a dance team. I was very, very busy in this modern life sort of way, as I'm sure many of you are as well. These were all things that I had chosen to do, but they come with a list of obligations that becomes a life to do list. My life isn't like that right now. I don't get the constant dopamine hits from the thrill of surviving the suffering of my own life. What this all means is that when I add and remove things from my life, the results are clearer. There's not as much noise to drown out or ignore the signals. A huge part of what I do is writing about my own thoughts and experiences and researching them. So, if anything, I'm amplifying the signals, which is something you could keep in mind as well, although I try hard not to be too reactionary or dramatic. So, going back to the previous times where I quit coffee in my life, what I remember most are the strong headaches when I stopped and the heart racing and also enjoyment when I started again. I don't know if it's because I made a conscious effort to drink a lot of water, mostly in the form of herbal tea, but I didn't get the headaches this time. And I want to say something else about the herbal tea. I had been thinking about the effects of coffee and what going without it would feel like in my life for months now. But it only became accessible when I found a store nearby that sold loose leaf herbal tea. I literally stopped drinking coffee the next morning. There's a powerful lesson there. Besides the headaches when I stopped, what I most remember about when I started again was just how strong of a stimulant coffee can be, but also how nice the experience feels. Experience wise, I brought it back as a Sunday morning treat, sitting on the couch, reading psychology and self development, had a nice little ceramic cup filled to the brim. Mm. But I'm always surprised how it affects my heart rate. It triggers some kind of alarm that brings it into my awareness and creates this tiny background anxiety. Does that background anxiety remain after you normalize to the everyday caffeinated state? That is a question. Anyways, headaches were my expectation, but they never actually came. In fact, I didn't really notice any difference whatsoever on day one. But on day two, things started to change. So I get into and out of the habit of lying in bed at night and thinking about something that I'm looking forward to the next day. Something to create that sense of excitement and purpose when I wake up. Sometimes this is a topic that I'm looking forward to writing about, or it could be some one off event that's happening that day. But way more often than anything else, it's just the thought of getting up and brewing that first cup of coffee and that first sip. Now, this might be the writing on the wall for what was about to happen and the state of my life, but I really did look forward to that, and it did make me a little bit happy. So I can still remember the way I felt on that second morning when I rolled out of bed and my feet hit the floor, and I thought to myself, I would have really been happy to be having a cup of coffee this morning. And that thought started the hardest thing about giving up coffee: a loss of motivation and slight depression. It lasted about a week until I did some writing that helped me move past the worst part of it. It wasn't like I wasn't getting things done, but I didn't have the same sense of accomplishment, and it made it really hard to keep working. Now, what caused this? Well, there's probably no simple single answer, but it's still a good question and something I'll return to at the end of this journey. So, besides that more serious side effect, the other thing I noticed was how tired I was in the morning. I noticed that when I ate my breakfast, a semi enormous bowl of oats and peanut butter that totals up to around 1,300 calories, about an hour later, I started to get pretty tired. I had never had a clear enough signal to make the connection that maybe my tiredness had something to do with the size of that meal. My stomach also felt different after eating without coffee, and I realized how strong of a digestive effect coffee has and just why I tend to drink it after most every meal. I also noticed how much more I started snacking: potato chips, ice cream, cookies, things I'm not normally that tempted by. I tend to drink coffee throughout the day, maybe 4 2-ounce cups of coffee, and I realized I was replacing that with eating. Hmm. It seems coffee is a huge part of my eating experience as well, both as a digestive and either as a hunger suppressant or a reward replacement. Now, because the loss of motivation was the biggest effect, and we'll cover that at the end, let's move on to some of the more positive stuff. First off, in terms of being tired as it relates to waking up from being asleep, I already believe that coffee isn't the best way to go about this. It goes back to my general philosophy of trying to do as many life things yourself instead of externalizing them to other things, like using coffee to wake up. I often like to wake up by cleaning up the kitchen a little bit, or doing some stretching, or just writing with a quiet mind in a quiet place. But you could bust straight out the door and go for a walk if that aligns with your life goals. I like to give myself that first hour or so to just be slow and wake up slowly. There's no doubt the level of awakeness that you feel isn't the same as with coffee, but this is probably where the biggest difference was in my experience in general. My energy levels felt more natural. I didn't get this sudden energetic plateau. I got a slow and imperceptible rise to a non observable state. There is no heightened sensation of awareness from some biological alarm signaling a state change in your body, just normalcy. The tiredness that I felt after eating that enormous bowl of oats for breakfast, that also felt supernatural. In fact, those first 3 days, I felt like I was released from the grasp of some controlling agent, and I could finally slip into the rest that my body needed. My desire to rest in that way decreased after that first week, even though the size of my breakfasts stayed the same. But I noticed something else when I laid down on the couch to rest after that meal: a reassuring calmness. My heartbeat, it felt very relaxed, like I had let go of something. I can't perfectly describe this to you in words, but this is undoubtedly the thing that I connected with most in giving up caffeine. I felt more energetically stable. I believed previously that coffee increased my focus, but I think I see that differently now. And here's where I first surprised myself. After that first week of depression and low energy, and maybe closer to the end of week 2, I really lost all interest and desire to drink coffee again at all. I had planned on reintroducing it by starting to drink decaf, and I had gone out and bought a fresh bag of it and set it on my counter so I could look forward to this moment. But I just stopped caring. It's hard to connect with the why of that feeling now, other than what I've just explained, but I just didn't want to be a coffee drinker anymore. Now, there could be a lot going into that, and that's why I always say it's so important to do the things that you think that you believe. I want to read from an article speaking about a recent discovery on antimatter. It's powerful stuff for your life, so listen closely. Ethan Siegel says this: although there are physicists who wonder, why did we even need to do this experiment? We all knew that antimatter has positive mass. That sentiment is absolutely foolish. We must remember, and I say this as a theoretical physicist myself, that physics is a 100% experimental science. We can be confident in our theory's predictions only insofar as we can test and measure what it predicts. As soon as we step outside the realm of what's been validated by experiment, we run the risk of stepping outside the realm of where our theory is valid. We just learned that Einstein's general relativity passed another test, the antimatter test, and with it, our greatest science fiction hope for achieving warp drive has completely evaporated. So I have more bad news other than the loss in future hope in a warp drive. The results in our individual human lives are probably even less easily predictable than that of theoretical physics, and they're sometimes just as shocking. So let's fast forward to the point where I start adding things back into this experiment, because you can't fully understand something until you go back and see it again with fresh eyes. So I first started with decaffeinated coffee, and I was not overwhelmed by emotion. I do like the viscous sense of coffee compared to tea, and I may even prefer it as a morning drink based on several weeks of choices afterwards, but it wasn't a life changing reintroduction. I thought that what I really liked about coffee was the taste, and that I could get that experience back through decaffeinated coffee without losing the connection to this natural and stable energy state that I had enjoyed without caffeine. Decaf was a bit of a letdown, although I still find myself drinking quite a lot of it. And then, nearly 4 weeks after going without, I finally brewed my first 250 milliliters of caffeinated coffee, and the results were immediate. Within minutes, I felt that rising energy that not only felt good, but that good feeling changed my perspective on life. All my research into caffeine related depression was meaningless. When something makes you feel this good every morning for years of your life, absent a lot of external noise, I think it's pretty likely you're going to suffer some sort of emotional withdrawal. So let me sing coffee's praises for a minute. Coffee seems to be the passive dopamine kick of all dopamine kicks, at least compared to the salty and sugary things that I was trying to replace it with. Coffee is correlated with quite a lot of good health outcomes, and it might be because, at least for those of us without the greatest diets, it can be one of the most significant sources of antioxidants in our lives. To be clear, tea and also decaffeinated coffee have similar outcomes, but the costs of coffee seem to be very low for the majority of us who drink it in moderation, and the positive effects seem to feel pretty massive. I like the way I feel after exercise too, but it's not passive. I have to put energy in to get energy out, and then I'm always a bit distracted by being hungry afterwards. Coffee just seems to be free energy. I had a really good experience drinking just that 250 milliliters or 1 cup of coffee between the hours of 8:30 and 11:30 in the morning. Now, I did have some sort of anxious feeling towards the end of that time window, and I didn't like it, but it also didn't last long, and I wouldn't say it was the primary feeling of my experience. The few times that I've drank coffee since then and before recording this video, I haven't really had any strong caffeine crash, but I will say that each time I drink caffeinated coffee, my experience subtly changes. At least on that first day, I felt that sense of motivation return for what I was doing. Although I think that also has to do with having had a good plan for the day and being very specific about how I was going to use this caffeinated state. And I think I got a bit lucky in that the things that I decided to do kind of matched coffee's high, bouncing around between a few different things. But it could also be the biggest difference was enjoying it that little bit extra. That little extra energy, that little extra boost, it really changes your experience. And I think it's what I was missing during that first week of semi depression. Maybe it's sad, but coffee is apparently a good friend in my life. It picks me up, and that dopamine kick is really hard to replace for such a low cost. It's clear, and I saw it as it was happening, that my reaching for cookies and ice cream and potato chips was about replacing that reward that I had gotten in my life every day for free. Eh, but we know nothing is ever for free. There's still that undeniable connection I had to not drinking coffee and the relaxed and yet powerful energy that I felt without it. Maybe it was a break from all those constant energy kicks. To not always be an atom with an extra excited electron that I'm trying to get rid of, just to be electrically neutral. I'm still trying to reconcile the two experiences, so if you're wondering what my conclusion is, it's hard to say. One conclusion is that I understand my life just that little bit better. I understand how something that I was formerly doing without much consideration affects me. When I involuntarily went without a cell phone for 3 months, the effects were obvious. I thought that it was having a bad effect on my life, and I'm still not that interested in what it's selling. But coffee? Hmm, its agenda seems a little bit less calculated. Even though it was clear from my day 2 morning realizations that I had lost some exciting part of my day and something that I valued, I didn't quite have the respect for coffee that I needed. Kind of like some all consuming romantic relationship where you lose your sense of self. Going without coffee reminded me that there's a decaffeinated me that's somehow different, somehow also valuable and worth paying attention to, and I needed to stay connected to that. I can say that when I edited the content for this video, that I no longer thought it was an obvious choice to have a coffee to help me concentrate on it. I thought that it would raise my excitement level too high and that it would actually make it more difficult to concentrate. That's a radically different conclusion than I would have had before doing this experiment. I also need to look at the things that provide excitement for me in my life. That's where the biggest shock was in that first week. Not only did I have to adapt physically to not getting that dopamine kick and calming the desire for it, but I had to adapt in my life practices in order to nourish this more raw and distilled version of myself. There are many things in this experiment that I can't say are causal or correlated, maybe all of them. But I've started reading more fiction before I go to sleep at night and really looking forward to that. I've started reading more in general. I've started looking for more content that evokes wonder and emotion in me, things on the cosmos or history, for example. Now, these behaviors might ebb and flow, but there's no doubt that removing the reward of caffeine in my life forced me to dig deeper into things that provide more meaning to me. I feel like caffeinated me is really into doing things and not necessarily admiring things. They could be two different people for two different situations. But I want to draw one last conclusion. As regards the ultra busy modern life, there's a good reason why the productivity world is so obsessed with caffeine and coffee. I could be generalizing massively here, but most of the people that I know like to have a coffee in hand when they're running around and doing things. They go well together. The dopamine kick of that caffeine and the slight mood enhancement picks you up in the valleys before the dopamine peaks of surviving your schedule and your to do list. They go well together. I think it subtly orients you more towards the quantity of life than the quality of life. It keeps nudging us towards the idea that the best life is one in which we're going faster and faster instead of slowing down. We're running, 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 and we never have to see what's there when we stop. But if we do, and we give it a chance to blossom, even though it might be painful and difficult, I think that what we're going to discover is another side to ourselves that both needs something like nurturing and also has a lot to give back as well. I don't think our life has to be about these peaks and valleys, but it can take place over more gently rolling terrain. In the end, we have to find a balance, and then we have to align back to our foundations so that we can stay balanced. But you can only balance when you have a conscious awareness of what it is you're balancing between. So, what's my final conclusion for you? Find something you want to go without and try it yourself and see what happens. Listen to the non transcribable language of your feelings. Keep experimenting. Peace out.